Hey, I'm Matt. Welcome to my podcast, The Imagining, a time to explore the imagination, creativity, and mental health. All of the conversations I'm having form part of the research for my new book. I hope that you have the opportunity during this time to discover something new about yourself. Well, here we go then. I'm about to record the first episode of The Imagining on my own. Episode like 13 or 14 at this point, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but loads of people have actually asked me to talk about my story and why I do what I do and why I started this podcast and why I'm writing the book and where I've came from and what my own creative journey has been and what my own journey with mental health has been. So this is going to be that, and we'll see how it goes. So I guess that, like any good story, we start at the beginning, and I'm not going to lie that going through school was something of a painful experience for me. I don't think that I ever really thrived there. It wasn't because I was dumb or because I didn't particularly like school. And I don't think I was particularly bad looking or particularly struggled making conversation, but I never really felt like I connected with anyone, at least connected with anyone on a deep level. And that might not be unique to me. I'm sure there's lots of people that feel like that. And it might be that no one feels like they connect with anyone on a deep level when they go to school. But I was really looking for deep connection because I've always struggled, or not struggled with small talk. I guess I'm quite good at small talk, really. But I definitely am in pursuit of deep connection a lot more than in pursuit of small talk. And that was the same when I was even 13 years old. And I guess to some level, people would find that probably quite annoying, because if you go and speak to someone on a deep level when you're 13 years old, obviously not everyone is going to suddenly reply with, oh yeah, let's have a deep conversation. I'm just not sure that's what many 13-year-olds do. Nevertheless, I was in school and I struggled a bit, but I also did struggle academically. I had dyslexia, although at the time it was undiagnosed. So I didn't really get any extra kind of time or help for that. But I remember, as a result of struggling, one of the big things that I remember really clearly was being shoved into this lower English classes, which you would have to take if you weren't good enough at English. In order, you had to be good enough at English to then take another language like Spanish or French. But I wasn't good enough at English, so they didn't let me do Spanish or French. So I ended up having to do double English, and that felt like a bit of a slap around the face. Because if I'm honest with you, I have always enjoyed the thought of writing, particularly stories and fairy tales and poems and things like that. I've always enjoyed the thought of doing it, even though maybe I didn't do it that much at the time. I have always enjoyed the thought of getting on board with that kind of lifestyle. But when you've got a school that are telling you that you're basically too dumb with languages, you're not good enough at English, to even the extent where you can do what everyone else does, you're going to have to go to this other special English class. That is that sucks a bit. And really, my life now, subsequently, I'm living in the fulfillment of pushing back against that. So when I went to uni, I had this moment, and uni was like a really big time for me. I had this moment of suddenly finding a passion for writing based upon the fact that I was really into thinking about how we communicate complicated, deep ideas around culture and why we think the way that we do. And because of the excitement of writing and conveying complex topics like that, it meant that I found enough energy to really push into writing and pick up on the things like when to use full stops and when to use commas and how to use language. And obviously, I remember getting my first essays back and they were just covered in annotations. And that sucked. But I think everyone gets that kind of feeling. But I was definitely pushing into it. Although I was really excited about this, I did have this one particular encounter with someone at the time who was marking my work. And I remember them really pushing back against me, probably the hardest that anyone's ever pushed. really kind of saying I wasn't professional. I didn't honor my faith. I didn't honor my profession with my approach, and how almost lazy I was being, or how hard I wasn't working. And I guess in some ways, whilst I do remember crying on the high street for a long time after this kind of encounter, and having loads of people tell me that I should complain to my university and things like that, I do remember it being a bit of a making moment for me, particularly around writing and discipline. Resultingly from that meeting, I pushed back, and I decided that instead of, not working with anymore, and instead of trying to get him out of my life and try and complain, I decided that I would use it as a bit of a making moment for myself, and pushed with everything I had to become the most disciplined, the most organized student that this person had ever had. I began finishing essays like a month before they were even due in, and I was going too quickly, which was really anti my character. And I think everyone around me was really, really confused about what was happening. But really, it was in that moment, after this horrific experience, which I still remember so clearly and vividly, it was after that moment, reluctantly I now say, that it was a real going into the fire moment that forced me, well, didn't force me, because you can do whatever you want, I guess, but it really pushed me into being a more disciplined and more thoughtful, more organized, and more creative thinker, because of the comments that this person had made. Now, in some ways, I have to be honest, it does frustrate me that that's probably what he was trying to do, and he would maybe see that as a success. And reluctantly, I would say that it was a success, although it was a very risky gamble. So moving on from that, my degree was in youth work and theology, which is why the faith theme has been coming up quite a lot in this podcast, is because my world has been working in the faith environment a little bit. And that has kind of bred certain kinds of conversations and certain kinds of thinking. So that's a little bit of my background. At the end of uni, I went into working for a schools work charity, and I quickly figured out that even though I'd studied youth work, that my dream wasn't to be working with young people. And if anything, I'm not sure I was very good at it. I wasn't a big fan of supporting young people to conform to something that I actually didn't necessarily think that I would want to conform to myself, in this case, like the education system. And I always remember really struggling trying to help kids get through the education system, when really I completely sympathized with them and how hard they were finding it and how limited they were finding it. So I had to kind of find a way out of youth work, even though my degree for the last 3 years and my job for the last 3 years have been in youth work, and I didn't really have any experience in anything else other than the music industry kind of, and the film industry kind of. When I was growing up, me and my cousin Alex Thorne, big shout out to him, had put together and made a few different short films. He was brilliant. He was a masterful camera user, cinematographer. Hell, using camera user. I've been making films for 5 years now, and I'm still calling them camera users. What a joke. He was a masterful cinematographer at that time in his life, and basically he brought me along to all of these different film shoots, and I would record the audio, and I would then do the music for the films that we made. And listening back, some of the audio is good, most of the music was not great. The filmmaking from my cousin was still to this day of a really high standard, although there was a few bits which maybe we look back upon now with a high degree of embarrassment. So at the end of youth work, all I really knew was that I had this slight creative skill within the music, the tech, the camera world. I had a skill in engaging with people and thinking about how people communicated and how people grow from my youth work study. and I didn't want to be a youth worker. So I tried to combine the both and set up a business in, really you would call it marketing, but mainly I was doing filmmaking for different, mainly third party organizations, charities, where the aim was kind of communicating something about growth, something about being more than you thought that you already are. So always had these kind of very human values at the center of the things that I was communicating. And that was very happy for a while, and I was really enjoying that. But like with all these things, I think I have been suppressing maybe my own need to communicate what I was thinking. And the filmmaking was always communicating what other people were thinking. And I guess that's a really good place to learn. But eventually, if you've got something that you feel like you want to communicate, you're going to have to start thinking about how you might do that. So about 2 years ago, I decided that I would make a documentary because I was a filmmaker, and I filmed loads of interviews, and it kind of fizzled out, as a lot of big, ambitious projects do. It fizzled out because of time, because of money, because it was just too hard, because sitting and kind of editing through hours and hours and hours and hours of documentary footage was really, really tedious. And oh man, I found it quite boring. No offense to anyone that gave an interview, but I just found it so hard to really bring all of them things together into something of a coherent film. Thus, I kind of laid down the project, and I was back to square one when it came to communicating something that I felt was important to me, until I arrived at this strange moment in my life where I remembered a prayer that someone had asked me to pray for them. About 4 years ago, I went to one of these big old houses with a group of, well, mainly teenagers, I think, but I think there was a few adults there, and it was a Christian thing. And I remember this young man asking me to pray for him. And he asked me if I could pray for God to take away his anxiety. And that's a very humble, honest, deserving prayer, in my opinion. I think that is probably a good prayer to pray. However, I was struck about 2-3 years later that prayer was not necessarily, whilst still right, wasn't really maybe a good articulation of how humans work. In that, if God took away our anxiety, would he have to take away our ability to create beauty as well? And that's a big leap in thinking. So basically, the book and this podcast is about connecting that leap in thinking. And I'm going to give you a couple of moments just now to try and explain what that leap in thinking was. The idea is that as someone with anxiety myself, that I had recognized in my life that at times of great boredom or of great stress, that my creative engine within inside myself, my imagination, had been given over to the task of creating anxiety-inducing thoughts like, what if I got cancer today and died tomorrow? What if I drove into that lamppost? What if I got stuck in a different country with a volcano going off and being sick, which actually did happen? What if? My mind got consumed with a lot of what ifs around, and they were all anxious, and they were all very intrusive, and they all kept coming like a sushi bar. The sushi bar analogy I spoke about in an earlier episode, it was like these horrible dishes of food just kept coming round in my mind, round and round and round and round. And there was very limited like kind of options on the conveyor belt of sushi that actually I even wanted to pay attention to. And they were very painful and very heavy and very costly thoughts for me. And that was consuming a lot of my imagination and a lot of my creative energy, was these thoughts of what if, and they were always creating negative things. So that was no good to me really, but something changed really. So about 4 years ago, and I know I'm jumping all over the timeline of my life here, but it is all important. About 4 years ago, I had this situation where I was working in a job that I didn't like. my first job out of uni with someone that I really struggled working with for a whole host of reasons, and ended up basically having a mental breakdown. And me and my wife Jess had to move back in with her parents for like a month and a half because I was completely broken. I didn't know what to do. I was staying in bed pretty much all day. I had developed this problem with my throat where it was so tight and the muscles were so constricted I could barely talk. And I was really unable to do anything. I remember them celebrating one night because I had made mince pies. And that was like the biggest achievement of things that I had done in like a whole month. And I was really at rock bottom and I didn't know what to do. And I think it's because this job that I was in, I was forced into this position where my brain was so unstimulated, so bored, that it was creating all of these anxieties, which were based upon all kinds of historical things that had happened, but also just completely random thoughts. That I was lost in an ocean, a stormy ocean of chaos inside my own head. And it took being very deliberate about some acts of creativity to kind of jump out of that. And that's when I started my own company in the film thing, in response to the fact that my mind was so consumed with creating chaos that I was really unable to create anything of beauty out of that chaos. And that for me is really where the book and the podcast really comes down to it, is that our brains and our creativity and our imaginations and our souls and hearts can get so lost in chaos sometimes. And that becomes our pursuit, is the management of chaos, the creation of chaos, the imagining of chaos. That actually we lose our ability, or at least don't have time for our ability to create beautiful things. And really, I would like to help people go on a journey of creating more beauty and mitigating their anxiety. And that prayer that I spoke about, where I prayed for that boy, it was out of recognition that, and the reason why I picked up on it and kind of reflected on it was because if we were to take away our ability to have anxiety, one, it wouldn't be entirely helpful, because obviously anxiety sometimes is useful. Like, if I did this, it would hurt. Like, that's useful imagining, like, of danger. And also you can imagine extremely too much in the beauty direction as well, which I'll be covering in my book. But what would it look like in order for us to be better friends of our imagination, so that we created more beauty and we mitigated more anxiety? I'm really looking at that process. So the way that I've decided to look at that process, even though dyslexia, even though additional English classes, even though the battering in my early years of uni, is through writing a book, because I felt like it was such a giant leap in my own understanding of how my own brain and my own imagination works, that I needed to really give it some very well thought through words. And when you do things like documentaries, it's kind of like, if you want to create a new word set, if you want to create a new language around something, by doing documentaries, you're only ever really gathering other people's words for it, and it's hard to come across your own language and develop something else. Whereas in a book, you can really dedicate time to searching for and exploring that language in all kinds of different ways. So I'm doing the book, and the podcast is all about research for that book. So I'm meeting with loads of different people, as you'll be listening and have heard, and trying to understand from their perspective what they feel are relevant issues about imagination, mental health, and creativity, so that I can chew on that information and then put it into my own words and my own writings, and just like kind of do my due diligence on writing about something, because I'm not a mental health expert. I don't have a degree in that or a PhD in that. I'm not really an expert in anything, I guess. So this is me trying to do that. The podcast isn't so that their words become the new language, like I said, because that would create the documentary problem that I just spoke about. It's more so that I can do as much research as I can to inform my book so that it becomes really interesting. A good example of that would be, I'm really fascinated by the relationship between courage and creativity. And I've spoken to so many different people about that relationship that, you know, I would have my own interpretation of what that relationship would be like. And I think drawing the link, the relationship between courage and creativity is probably quite a new thing to draw. However, it's been really nice thinking about other people's understandings. Like when I spoke to Alan about how for some people it's just courageous to plod along just to get through the day, especially when they've not got much. Or when I spoke to Eddie just this morning and about how people that are experiencing domestic abuse, how, you know, they've run out of courage by the end of the day when all they've been having to try and do is just get through it and still be safe, you know. So that's been really helpful. Another example of that would be the conversations I have with Lisa and with John about their cultural backgrounds and how it's affected them. You know, I can only speak from my Essex boy experience of the world, which is still valid. However, speaking to people that grew up in different places, had different cultures inputting into their life, had such a richness in understanding anything, I guess. But in this scenario, it has such a richness in understanding the importance of creativity or how people feel about mental health and whether it's a prevailing issue or not. Advantages and disadvantages of all kinds of different cultural impacts in our lives. So the podcast is designed for that, and the book is designed to address this burning question within myself, which is, how do I mitigate my anxiety, or just the anxiety of people that I care about, the anxiety of anyone that I meet just in the street that is really consumed by it, and how do I help someone create beauty? And thus, I think that it's really beginning to address the question, is everyone creative? I know that's another leap, but actually I just want to encourage you that you are creative. You do have an imagination wherever you are. And at the moment, it might feel like that imagination is an enemy. It might feel like all the creativity and imagination you have is going into creating anxiety, and you're always burning with questions like, what if this happened? What if I'm like this? What if I did this? And that could be very painful for you. But I hope that this podcast is maybe helping turn some of that imaginative energy and helping manage our creativity better so that it pushes the beautiful forth and out of us in our lives. So that's really the aim of what I'm doing. In regards to timeline, I guess this is the other big question everyone's always asking me. And, you know, it's a hard question to ask because really it's based upon how much hard work and time I put into it. But people are always asking me, when's the book coming? And the honest answer is, man, as soon as I possibly can make it come, I guess, without rushing it. So, yeah, that's when it's going to come. As soon as it can is the answer. My life has significantly changed in the last 3 months because literally just the week or 2 weeks before, maybe even the week actually, that the first episode of the podcast came out, you know, I had a baby, little Indiana, and my life has been changed by that forever. He is a cool kid. I really like him, but the kid doesn't sleep sometimes, you know. He's forever pooing on my lap. And I'm not going to lie, when things like that happen, it makes it very hard to kind of get your head back into the space of writing. And then finally, I guess the question to address is around what the actual book is going to be like. And the actual book is going to be a combination of 3 things. The first element of the book, for every chapter, I've written a fairy tale. And the reason that I've written a fairy tale is because I feel like fairy tales have been useful throughout history to articulate things that are maybe a little bit hard to get our heads around, to either articulate the best of humanity or the worst of humanity. So I've tried to write some fairy tales that speak to how we think, and how we use our imaginations. Secondly, there's going to be bits of research. That research is made up of things like this podcast and the conversations I'm having, but it's also made up of some very basic kind of primary and secondary research that I'm doing through social platforms like Facebook. And thirdly, it's made up of just my own life story and my own life's anecdotes as someone that has journeyed along life with anxiety and seeked to be creative and make an impact on this world. So it'll be a bit of a collection of all of them three. And if you've made it this far into the episode and you are interested, I would love to maybe bring you on board into the early stages of the book. I'm really fortunate that this podcast has developed something of a little community around it already, and I am so grateful for those of you that have been part of it. People like Lottie and Lisa, my dad, who is just oh man, I love my dad so much. He has been such a vital part of this process coming together. And my mum's been amazing too, but big shout out to my dad. I'm just so grateful for some of these. I'm just so grateful for some of you that have just shown up time and time again to come and support this podcast and support me in this journey of writing. I'm also grateful to Jess. I don't want to miss that out. You're going to be hearing from her soon, actually. We're going to hopefully record an episode over Christmas with Jess, which will be fun. But I am so grateful for all of the attention that you've given and all of the listening ears, but also just the encouragement to keep going. And I would love it if you would like. I'd love to just invite you to be early readers of some of the stuff that I'm writing. And yeah, I'll be brave and even let you give me some feedback if and trust me, that's really not a fun process, feedback for a book. Really not enjoying that. So yeah, that's the first episode that I'm going to record on my own. I hope that that's kind of giving you a bit of an overview about what's happening, where I'm at, why I'm doing the podcast, who I am, why I'm doing what I'm doing. If you are interested to hear specifically about some more things that I've spoken about, then for sure, hit me up. I would love to answer some questions. Secondly, I am going to try and record like a 6-part, maybe even 10-part series based upon the chapters of the book and really make that a bit more of a multimedia experience, have lots of music and kind of bring together multiple interviews for single episodes. So hopefully we can come up with and do something like that as well. So if that floats your boat, then let me know. Also, I'd just really love it if you haven't already, if you could subscribe. It means a lot. It really means a lot. It means that I know that this content is landing with people. Not that that's necessarily important in and of itself, because, I'm doing this in some ways really just to get in touch with something that needs to come out of me regardless of whether people care or not. But it would really help if you subscribed to my YouTube channel. It would really help if you click the follow button on Spotify or Apple or Overcast or wherever you're listening. It's a really big encouragement every time someone does that. Really big encouragement, and it means a lot. And I really hope that this wasn't too boring, just listening to me on my own. And I think we'll end it with this, because my mum, for the 5th time, is asking me if Jess would like anything for Christmas, and I think I should probably reply to that. Thanks so much for listening to the Imagining podcast. You guys are the best. And let's get this book finished. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Imagining. I hope that you've had the opportunity to discover something new about yourself. If you wouldn't mind and you enjoyed listening, then I would be really appreciative if you subscribed on whatever channel you're listening on.